This is Officer Brent Woodard, caught on camera forcing himself into a citizen's home in New Mexico. At first glance, it might seem like just another routine operation, but the truth is very much darker. He was trespassing without a warrant and resorting to physical abuse.
Get out of my house!
Out of the way.
That's illegal!
Stop,
You can't
stop,
do that!
stop.
And yet, shockingly, his actions are only the beginning. However, his corrupt move is nothing compared to others on this list. From being secretly involved in murder and vandalism to leading criminal gangs within the police force, these are the wildest moments corrupt cops were caught on camera. Dennis Perkins, starting with this Louisiana police officer who was caught in the most compromising situation. To the public, he was a guardian of justice, but behind this carefully maintained image is a horrifying truth. Perkins was living a double life with monstrous violations of human dignity. He committed acts of sexual assault, child porn, and abuse that went far beyond breaking the law. The investigations into Perkins' crimes began to expose the depths of his crime. As evidence increased, the horrifying extent of his dead acts came to light. Perkins had used his position of power as a shield for his heinous acts. When the case finally went to trial, the evidence against Dennis Perkins was overwhelming. The survivors came forward with their testimonies, revealing how much of a predator he is. The jury found Perkins guilty on multiple counts, and he was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of probation or parole. David Carrick. And if you think his crime is scary, then wait until you hear about this London Metropolitan cop.
Guilty pleas to 49 offences, including rape, false imprisonment, coercive control, and sexual assault.
He began his law enforcement career like many others, eager, hopeful, and committed to serving and protecting his community. However, he suddenly became the very thing he was fighting against. It started with small, seemingly harmless transgressions, accepting bribes from local businesses in exchange for turning a blind eye to minor infractions. What seemed like small acts of corruption soon grew into something far more dangerous. The money, the power, it became an addiction, pulling Carrick deeper into a much darker world. Over time, his crimes escalated. Carrick's involvement in the drug trade shocked even the most professional investigators. No longer just a bystander, he became an active participant. Using his badge to protect drug dealers, he sabotaged police efforts, feeding them vital information about ongoing investigations. But Carrick didn't stop there. He became complicit in the cover-up of violent crimes committed by fellow officers. He conspired to protect them, officers guilty of police brutality and excessive force. His run of corruption might have continued had it not been for a few brave individuals within his own department. Whistleblowers who began to suspect his involvement in criminal activities. They risked it all, gathering evidence discreetly, uncovering a trail of suspicious financial transactions, informant testimonies, and intercepted communications that pointed directly to him. Internal Affairs launched a covert operation to catch Carrick in the act. He was led to believe he was aiding in a major drug deal, his greed blinding him to the trap closing in around him. And just as planned, he walked right into it, handing over crucial evidence that destroyed him. With an overwhelming amount of evidence against him, the prosecution laid out a damning case against him, detailing his involvement in bribery, drug trafficking, and the cover-up of fellow officers' crimes. Later on, David Carrick was sentenced to a minimum of 32 years behind bars. While Carrick's betrayal of trust was rooted in years of crime and manipulation, another officer's actions took a violent turn on the streets. Jim Rodriguez. On September 29, 2019, the Park City Police Department received a call that would set the stage for a disturbing confrontation. A heated argument was unfolding in a club drive. Officers arrived to find two men during a furious exchange. The argument was about two teenagers, Jack Franchik among them, riding their gas-powered bicycles on the streets. But what seemed like a simple neighborhood dispute would soon turn into something much darker. One of the men involved approached the officers, claiming to have had a confrontation with Michael Franchik, Jack's father. According to the man, Franchik had become aggressive. Another witness to the altercation informed the officers that she had seen a gun in Michael Franchik's possession. Officer Jim Rodriguez, armed with the witness testimony, made his way to Michael Franchik's home, along with his colleague, intending to defuse the situation and ensure the safety of everyone involved. But as they approached the front porch, something was already off. Michael stood outside, cell phone in hand, recording the encounter. After a brief exchange, the officers began questioning Michael about the argument. Their focus remained on the alleged firearm, but things quickly went sideways. Without warning, Michael Franchek made a sudden decision, retreating into his house. The officers were caught off guard, and in a moment of aggression, they forced their way inside without a warrant, determined to arrest him. Michael, still insisting he wasn't armed, pleaded with the officers as they pushed forward, not listening to his words. It wasn't long before they deployed a taser, using force to drag him from his home. Jack, now caught in the middle of the situation, began filming the officers as they dragged his father. This simple act of defiance seemed to fuel their rage. The officers, already agitated, now focused their anger on Jack, attempting to seize his phone and stop him from recording. But the young boy refused to back down. The officers, realizing they had no grounds to arrest him, turned their attention to a legal technicality: the legality of riding a gas-powered bicycle without a driver's license. But Jack wasn't about to let them use that to justify their aggression. In the end, they couldn't break him, but they succeeded in taking Michael Franchek from his home, taking him away to be booked at Summit County Jail. Even though Jim Rodriguez's misuse of power was disturbing, the same can be said about this next cop, Michael Dotro. At the center of Edison, New Jersey, a once trusted officer of the Edison Police Department betrayed the badge he wore. Michael Dotro, a man who once vowed to uphold the law, was caught in a web of crime for so many years. His actions left destruction, fear, and betrayal, tarnishing the trust placed in his department. Among Dotro's most shocking crimes was an act of arson. His reign of terror extended to acts of vandalism where he targeted individuals who had crossed him. Cars were slashed, tires destroyed, and victims were left to grapple with financial loss and fear. Meanwhile, the darkest chapter of Dotro's story is his plot to harm his own colleagues. In a shocking betrayal, he conspired with others to attack a fellow officer, devising a plan to detonate an explosive device at the officer's home. For years, Dotro evaded justice, but his downfall began with the very investigation he wanted to avoid. The Edison Police Department, responding to mounting allegations, launched an internal affairs probe. The fire at Captain Anderko's home became a starting point. Fire investigators quickly determined it was arson, and suspicion fell squarely on Dotro. Witnesses and fellow officers, risking their own safety, came forward with crucial evidence. Their courage helped expose the full extent of Dotro's crimes, from conspiracy to murder, arson, and witness tampering. The severity of his actions drew the attention of federal agencies, the FBI working alongside local authorities. Surveillance, testimonies, and forensic evidence painted a picture of a man who had weaponized his authority for personal vendettas. Fast forward to 2017, justice prevailed after Michael Dotro was convicted on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit murder and arson. In the end, he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Wayne Jenkins. If you think that isn't disturbing enough, what happens when authorities sworn to serve and protect become the predators? Wayne Jenkins was once a celebrated figure within the Baltimore Police Department, a sergeant in the elite Gun Trace Task Force, or GTTF. His badge symbolized justice and safety, but unfortunately, Jenkins harbored a dark secret. His rise through the ranks, from joining the department in 2003 to leading a specialized unit, was accompanied by a descent into corruption so profound. Jenkins exploited his position of authority to rob drug dealers and civilians alike. Illegal searches became routine, as did the theft of cash, drugs, and firearms. Extortion was their currency, wielded with chilling precision against anyone who dared to cross them. The corruption didn't stop at theft. Their victims were left to bear the crushing weight of false charges. This wasn't just corruption. It was a calculated betrayal of justice. His crimes extended even further. Acts of physical violence, kidnappings, and intimidation. Jenkins' unit operated like a gang in uniform, terrorizing a city they were sworn to protect, and for years no one challenged them. But every empire of corruption has its fall. Suspicious officers within the department risked their careers and their safety to expose the truth. Whistleblowers triggered an internal investigation, and soon, the U.S. Department of Justice launched a federal inquiry into the Baltimore Police Department's practices. Using wiretaps and advanced surveillance, investigators unraveled a web of deceit. The evidence was undeniable. Conversations, movements, and stolen goods all linked Jenkins and his team to their crimes. In January 2018, everything finally crumbled. Wayne Jenkins pleaded guilty to federal charges, including robbery, extortion, planting evidence, and overtime fraud. His sentence was 25 years in a Kentucky prison. Even though his story reveals the depths of corruption within law enforcement, what happens when a police officer becomes not just a thief, but a killer? Kenneth Blue. On August 30th, 2011, the lifeless body of Jennifer Webb was discovered in her car. She was 8 months pregnant. Her death was initially ruled a suicide. Her body was found hanging from a seatbelt, but the circumstances around her death were far from ordinary. Jennifer's family, overwhelmed with grief, refused to believe the official explanation. Their instincts were correct. As investigators took a deeper observation, the story took a shocking turn. Evidence surfaced revealing that Kenneth Blue was not just a bystander in this tragedy. He was deeply involved in it. It turned out that Blue was the father of Jennifer's unborn child, and their relationship had been a secret. A few days later, the case turned on its head when the autopsy results came back. The report showed that Jennifer Webb had been strangled to death, ruling out suicide. Suspicion now turned toward homicide. Adding to the intrigue was a weird suicide note found near Jennifer's body. Filled with contradictions and oddities, the note only deepened the mystery and pointed investigators toward foul play. Meanwhile, the investigators uncovered damning evidence. Surveillance footage showed Blue's police cruiser parked near Jennifer's car at the time of her death. Phone records revealed he had been in contact with Jennifer just hours before her murder. Each piece of evidence painted a darker picture of the situation. The most incriminating discovery came from DNA analysis. Samples collected at the crime scene matched Blue's DNA, leaving no doubt about his involvement. In September of 2011, Kenneth Blue was arrested and charged with the murder of Jennifer Webb and her unborn child. The trial that followed in January 2013 was a dramatic and emotional ordeal. Prosecutors laid out a devastating case, presenting surveillance footage, phone records, and DNA evidence that left no room for doubt. The jury found Blue guilty of first-degree murder. He was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but as cold as his case was, Daniel Holtzclaw's crimes represent an even more insidious abuse of power. Daniel Holtzclaw, a man sworn to protect, who instead preyed upon the most vulnerable. Between December 2013 and June 2014, his badge became a weapon of terror. Holtzclaw targeted African American women, often those from low-income backgrounds or with criminal records, with the confidence that their voices would go unheard. Under the guise of routine stops or interrogations, he used his authority to commit unspeakable acts, sexual assault and rape. Victims described being cornered, coerced, and silenced by threats of arrest or retribution. For many, their past brushes with the law made them fear that no one would believe their word against a uniformed officer. But the truth began to unravel in 2014 when a 57-year-old grandmother, one of Holtzclaw's victims, courageously broke her silence. Her report marked the beginning of an investigation that exposed a horrifying pattern. Investigators uncovered testimony after testimony, each victim recounting disturbingly similar experiences. Holtzclaw had systematically chosen women he believed society had forgotten, exploiting their vulnerabilities to satisfy his predatory urges. DNA samples found in Holtzclaw's patrol car, hair, saliva, tied him directly to his crimes. Surveillance footage revealed his patrol car parked in secluded areas, corroborating the victims' accounts. Piece by piece, a picture emerged of a predator hiding in plain sight. In November of 2015, Daniel Holtzclaw's trial began, where he faced 36 charges, including sexual battery and rape. The defense, desperate to discredit the victims, pointed to their criminal records, suggesting they were unreliable witnesses. On December 10, 2015, Daniel Holtzclaw was found guilty on 18 of the 36 charges, including first-degree rape. The court sentenced him to 263 years in prison, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And just like Holtzclaw, this next cop has a history of misconduct that had been ignored, allowing him to continue to misuse his badge. Brent Woodard. On May 15, 2022, the town of Mountain Air became the stage for another shocking abuse of power. Officer Brent Woodard, a man with a documented history of unwarranted violence, added another victim to his list. It began with a call to police, a report of a possible domestic disturbance. The officers responded to a home, expecting to defuse a tense situation. But what unfolded instead would highlight a strange abuse of authority. There was no crime, no danger, just a misinterpreted scenario. But Officer Woodard, known for his violent tendencies, stormed violently into the scene. Ignoring protocol, Woodard threw the woman from the doorway, tearing her shirt in the process, and forced his way inside the home. Fortunately, another officer, a female colleague, stepped in. She removed Woodard from the scene and de-escalated the situation. By listening to the woman and communicating with care, she unraveled the truth. There was no domestic violence, no threat, only a misunderstanding. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Despite Woodard's long record of aggression, records his peers and superiors were well aware of, his behavior had gone unchecked. Other officers on the scene stood by in silence, refusing to intervene. For worse, Woodard's police chief had promoted him in the past despite his history of abusing suspects.